This video is sponsored by Brilliant, genuinely one of my favorite online learning services. More on that later. Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. Today's episode, How the Russian Empire Came into Existence. Russia is home to one of the world's most resilient people. Having been forced to contend with constant threats from within and without, it has endured some of the largest invasions in history, and yet its defiant spirit has remained unbroken. Today, Russia is one of the largest countries on Earth, but its total landmass equates to only about 75% of the size of the 19th century Russian Empire. But if Russia dealt with constant incursion since its inception, how exactly did it enter empire status to begin with? Russia's imperial origins are fascinating, and as mentioned previously, the people inhabiting this region have braved countless trials and tribulations. Before we answer the central question though, we need to travel back 700 years, when the territory that would later comprise the Russian Empire was still under control of the Mongols. To help me do this is Epithemius on YouTube.
During this time, Eastern Europe was composed of numerous principalities, many of whom paid tribute to the Mongols since the 13th century. One such principality, the Grand Duchy of Muscovy, capitalized on the situation and began to absorb its neighbors. The success of Muscovy prompted the Mongols to designate it as their representative in the region. In 1480, the Muscovites, under the leadership of Grand Prince Ivan III, became powerful enough to rebel against the Mongol successor state in the region, the Golden Horde, and thereby gain their independence.
By 1547, a very important year in Russian history, Grand Prince Ivan IV, who would eventually receive the flattering title of the Terrible, began to violently assert control over his nobility, ushering in an era of absolutist rule. In the words of Dr. Arthur Hasiotis, author of The Extraordinary Rise of the Russian Empire, Ivan IV's attack on remnant elements of the old feudal system appears to have been aimed at eliminating those remaining elements that resisted the consolidation of centralized autocratic power. This and the expansion of the Muscovite state caused Ivan to declare himself Tsar or Caesar of all Russia in that same year of 1547. Under Ivan's rule, Russia's territory expanded by over 1.5 million square miles. When Ivan died in 1584, he left his kingdom to his son and namesake, his beloved Ivan Ivanovich. No wait, he killed that one. He left his kingdom to Theodore, who died heirless 14 years later. What followed was a period of political turmoil and famine known as the Time of Troubles. This unfortunate chapter in Russia's story lasted until 1613, when Michael Romanov was elected Tsar by a grand council comprised of nobles and peasants alike. The Romanovs led Russia out of the Time of Troubles, and in 1672, Michael's grandson Peter would go on to turn Russia into an empire. Peter, who would go on to earn the title the Great, was forward-looking from the start. Being tutored by foreigners, he embarked on a tour of Western Europe shortly before the turn of the 17th century. Peter was particularly impressed by the shipyards and vessels of the Dutch, so much so that it is believed that the tricolor flag of Russia was inspired by the Dutch flag. In France and England, Peter was enthralled by the idea of planned cities, and he took a liking to Western architecture. As soon as he returned, Peter began enacting reforms that would modernize Russia and turn it into a great power. Peter's tour of Europe made him realize how archaic Russia's bureaucracy was. In order to imitate the absolutism of such monarchs as Louis XIV, Peter expanded the jurisdiction of his government, placing monopolies on imported goods and levying comprehensive taxes. In 1703, he ordered the construction of St. Petersburg on the Baltic coast, which was to be the new capital of Russia. The city incorporated the most modern Western designs, and also served as a trading hub, facilitating contact with the rest of Europe. At long last, Russia's doors were wide open to the rest of Europe. Peter also waged war to strengthen Russia's standing in the world. From 1700 to 1721, Russia was embroiled in the Great Northern War against Sweden. The war was a resounding success for the Russians and their allies, stripping Sweden of her status as a great power and paving the way for Russian expansion in the future. It was immediately after the war in 1721 that Peter enacted his most important reforms. First, he declared Russia an empire, designating himself as emperor, a title which he felt was more appropriate for his expanded state. Secondly, he wrote the Table of Ranks, which organized Russian society into a relatively loose social pyramid, one in which peasants and other commoners could rise by serving the state or acquiring wealth. The table, which was based on similar systems being used in Prussia and Denmark, increased the efficiency of the Russian government and promoted talent. It would go on to be used for nearly 200 years until the Russian Revolution. The next great Russian monarch would be the renowned Catherine the Great. Catherine was highly educated and appreciated the arts. As such, she attempted to modernize Russian culture by constructing opera houses and schools. Like Peter, she sought to introduce Enlightenment-era ideas to the government, but her attempts encountered some resistance from the nobility. Still, under Catherine, the Russian Empire grew even mightier than before, as it expanded into Poland, pushed the Ottomans out of Crimea, and took the first steps in colonizing Alaska. Catherine died in 1796, just before the start of the Napoleonic Wars, another event which would profoundly affect Russia and culminate in the destruction of Moscow. The turn of the 19th century marked the beginning of the end of the Russian Empire. Following the defeat of Napoleon, Russia saw almost a century of civil unrest, which was provoked by the continued failure of Russia to adapt to changes in technology and philosophy. The lackluster performance of the Imperial Russian Army in the Crimean War, with its logistical failures and lack of morale, perfectly illustrated the increasing inefficiencies of the government. There was a belated attempt to industrialize the overwhelmingly agrarian economy in 1861 with the emancipation of the serfs, or Russian peasants, by Emperor Alexander II. Although the emancipation was responsible for roughly 200% growth in the economy between the year it was announced and 1900, Russia's economic power still paled in comparison to the other great powers of Europe, and the former serfs remained impoverished. Professor Michael T. Florinsky, in his book The End of the Russian Empire, notes that the average yearly expenditure of a peasant was 54.92 rubles, or about $27. The peasant family, sometimes a large one, lived in a space of some 2,400 to 3,000 cubic feet, or 200 square feet. The precursory disaster that would contribute to the fall of the Russian Empire was the Russo-Japanese War, which lasted from 1904 to 1905. Needless to say, Russia's defeat was humiliating, and the war triggered dissatisfaction with both the government and reigning emperor Nicholas II, culminating in the Revolution of 1905, a forerunner to the Revolution of 1917. The final straw, however, would prove to be the First World War. In 1917, 3 years after the start of the conflict, near anarchy broke out when workers began to strike and the army experienced widespread mutiny. The Revolution of 1917 ended with the abdication of Nicholas II, and in early 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk ended Russia's involvement in the First World War, at the cost of more than 1.5 million casualties. Although control of Russia continued to be contested between revolutionaries and counter-revolutionaries for the next 4 years, it was apparent to all observers that the Russian Empire declared by Peter the Great was over. The key events that led to the creation of the Russian Empire can be attributed to the following: the rise of Muscovy in the wake of the Mongol invasion, the stability provided by the Romanov dynasty after the time of troubles, and most importantly, the reforms of Catherine and Peter the Great. Peter the Great led Russia at a time when getting a basic education was a privilege. Under some of the world's best tutors, and with an almost aggressively curious personality, Peter easily became one of history's most humanist autocrats. Like Peter, if you are serious about studying any subject, it serves you well to learn the crucial abilities of critical thinking and problem solving. Any historian will agree that understanding history requires extensive consideration, as opposed to simple memorization. Much like Peter's tutors, today's sponsor, Brilliant, offers courses on numerous mathematical, scientific, and logical subjects to help you build frameworks and solve problems. Something that I personally enjoy is just the casual nature of Brilliant's courses. Even using it once a week will contribute significantly to your ability to reason, which can be applied to any subject. Peter the Great applied his critical thinking skills to acquire expertise in a myriad of different topics besides statesmanship, ranging from architecture, the construction of ships, to even dentistry. Support our channel by using the link in the description below, or by going to brilliant.org/armchairhistorian. It's free to sign up, but hurry. The first 195 people, the exact number of years the Russian Empire existed, will receive 20% off their annual premium subscription. Thanks for watching. I'd like to thank the Armchair Historian team and my general staff on Patreon. If you're interested in learning more about Russian history, we've got a playlist for videos on the Crimean War and Charge of the Light Brigade. Lastly, be sure to check out Epithemius' video on early Russian history. I'll see you next time with our video on Napoleon's invasion of Russia.